Okay. Well, how realistic is that? Or there's two parts of this question. Is how realistic is that to get kids involved in the production of their own media, and given the fact of economics and all that kind of stuff?
Sure.
And also, how successful is this strategy? I mean, one of the faults that I see in that is that you make people critically aware of what's going on and how something is constructed. And oftentimes, especially in education, in high school, even university, it stops there. And what happens is, of course, you create a much more literate or informed consumer. So, how do you go about tackling these kind of questions as an educator?
Right. Well, there's about three questions there, aren't there, really? Let's take the first one. I absolutely agree with you about practical work. By practical work, I don't mean elaborate production. That's very time-consuming. It's rather expensive, and on the whole, most of the work I've seen in that area tends to be reproductive. It actually tries to copy and imitate the kind of stuff that the kids habitually watch on television, and doesn't succeed on that level. By practical work, I really think of much more homely stuff. It's messing about with images. It's actually creating your own photo play. It's actually doing slide tape presentations. It's actually doing news production just by moving still pictures around. I don't know, perhaps, designing the front page of a newspaper from material that you're given. It's doing a 5-minute current affairs program with masses of material that the kids have got to sift through. So what I think of it of is, or how I conceptualize it, isn't as production. It's what I would call critical practice. And the way that works can be, I mean, if you've got a TV, just a single TV camera, and we're studying, let's say, interviews on TV, look at a few interviews, look at the dominant modes, the dominant range of techniques that are available, and then try them out, ourselves, and play with the conventions, and play with the codes. This is very fresh in my mind because I've just actually been doing a session with some 14-year-olds on news, and they did a news simulation. They made their own news program, made a 5-minute program from some material that I gave them. But what I asked them to do was to change one of the conventions. And it didn't matter what it was, but just to do one thing that was very different. And it was amazing because one of the groups shot everything in close-up. Yeah, the newsreader was shot in tight close-up, all the interviews were done in tight close-up. What was brilliant about that was that it revealed a code that we normally take for granted and that we don't read as a code at all, that there is actually a very respectful distance that we have from newsreaders. They're telling us the truth. We don't have that interrogative mode which the close-up actually signifies. Another group, for instance, didn't use any reporters. Yeah? If they covered a story, the people who were the main participants in the story reported it for themselves. Brilliant, because it reveals that every story that's produced on the news is actually mediated to us, that people aren't allowed to speak for themselves. Yeah? We get everything at second hand. So it's really, I call them code-breaking exercises, playing it. Then what we do is we go back to the news and see the ways in which the work we've been doing actually alters our perceptions of what's going on there. So I see it as a complete integration of what I call critical practice and practical criticism. And that's a long way, really, from, what most people would think of as being production.
Right. Well, the other part of the question was, if you remember that far back, is a lot of what goes on in media literacy and cultural studies and analysis, as I said, allows people to look at the media and their culture in a creative way and see how it's constructed. But it rarely goes beyond that. And I, in my own work, I sort of sense it as a teacher that when I do my stuff, I know that I'm going to get students that are going to be good at looking at ads, but perhaps it doesn't sink in. I mean, that they're part of a system there that create their values as well. I mean, they play with that. They engage with it in a playful way, but I don't think that they go the next step forward. I mean, that's a pedagogical problem, which I don't know how to go about.
Well, I think that I would say there are a number of things there. First of all, I don't underestimate the importance of producing a population which has a critical attitude towards the mass media. That seems to me to be absolutely essential to the preservation of democratic values. So I don't underestimate the significance and importance of that at all. As far as connecting with wider issues and wider questions, I mean, I think there are 2 points. First is that any decent media course will have a fairly strong practical element, and the kids will be learning how to express themselves through a variety of media, so that there will be a sense in which these things are much more available to them than they would be if they were simply being educated through print culture. The third thing, I think, is that a good media studies class should link up with and home in on current controversial issues, the current debates that are going on about the media and within the media. And some of the most important debates of our time are actually media-orientated debates. And we should be, as cultural and media studies teachers, be giving kind of historical and philosophic and political contextualizing to those debates. So, I mean, I think that's important to produce a media literate citizenry. Goes beyond simply getting people in the privacy of their own homes to kind of like decode adverts or documentaries or whatever. It's producing an informed, articulate citizenry that can actually affect important debates about social representation, about how social knowledge is constructed. You know, it's definitions of ourselves that are at stake here, and that's actually important. And I think we've seen over the past decade really quite important movements where people with a particular subcultural or political or environmental interest have actually got together and actually have affected the kind of images that are in circulation. And I think there's much more sensitivity on the part of journalists to those kinds of things. The other thing, of course, is that a lot of media courses around the world are actively linked to the training of journalists themselves. And that's important too, that journalists should understand that there's more to what they're doing than simply writing stories, that, you know, that in dealing with representations, they actually have to think about a whole range of very sensitive issues that entails. And I think that in Finland, for instance, and in Malaysia, where I've been working, the training of journalists is very much, or the best journalist is very much tied in with cultural studies programs and media studies programs, where the students are exposed to a much wider range of ideas than simply, you know, the kind of technicist approach of learning shorthand and you know, getting the story and so on.